At the bus stop, a shivering girl had nothing, until a child whispered, "Can you be my mommy?" The wind cut through the narrow street like a knife, rattling the rusted bus sign and sending candy wrappers tumbling along the pavement. At the far end of the stop, under the weak glow of a flickering streetlight, sat a girl with trembling hands. Her coat was so thin that it barely clung to her shoulders, her shoes torn at the soles, her hair plastered with the damp of a passing drizzle. She looked no older than 21, but life had carved into her face a weariness that belonged to someone much older. Her name was Lila, and tonight, she had nowhere to go. The shelter had closed its doors an hour earlier. The job interview she had walked to, wearing that same ripped coat, had ended with polite apologies and a turned-away glance at her resume. Now she sat at the bus stop, staring at her hands, wondering if she should ride anywhere at all. What difference would it make? Every direction felt like a dead end. Her stomach clenched from hunger. She hugged herself tighter, whispering, "Just hold on, Lila. Just hold on." That was when she felt a tug at her sleeve. Startled, Lila turned and saw a boy, no more than 6 years old, standing beside her. His curly hair was wild from the wind, his cheeks flushed pink, his coat far too small for the bitter chill. But it wasn't the cold that made his voice quiver when he leaned in close. It was his words. "Can you be my mommy?" he whispered. Lila blinked, stunned. "What?" The boy's eyes glistened as he repeated himself, a little louder this time. "Can you be my mommy?" Before Lila could answer, a woman, ragged, thin, and clearly intoxicated, stumbled into view. The boy flinched at the sight of her. She muttered something unintelligible, yanked at the boy's arm, then swayed and collapsed onto the nearest bench. Her breathing grew heavy as she passed out, reeking of alcohol. Lila looked at the child. He stood frozen, small hands gripping the hem of his shirt, eyes begging for something more than words could say. In that moment, something inside Lila shifted. She had been drowning in her own despair for weeks, ever since she'd lost her job, her tiny apartment, and the last family member who had ever cared for her. But here, standing in the cold night, was someone smaller, more fragile, and more abandoned than she was. Someone who needed her. Her lips trembled. "Sweetheart," she said softly, bending down to his level. "Where's your home?" The boy pointed weakly at the woman snoring on the bench. "That's my mom," he whispered, as if ashamed. Then his voice cracked. "But she doesn't want me anymore." Lila's heart broke. She wrapped her arms around him, and for the first time in months, she felt warmth, not from her coat, not from the night air, but from the tiny heartbeat against her chest. The next few hours unfolded in ways Lila could never have imagined. She didn't take the bus that night. Instead, she carried the boy, his name was Eli, to the nearest diner, using the last crumpled bills in her pocket to buy him a grilled cheese sandwich and hot chocolate. She didn't eat. She only watched him devour every bite as though it were the first real meal he'd had in weeks. As he ate, he talked. He told her about how his mom used to be different, how the bottles had slowly replaced bedtime stories, how he would sometimes sleep outside when things got too scary at home. His little voice wavered, but his eyes clung to Lila's as though she were the last safe place in the world. And for the first time, Lila realized, she was. The days that followed were not easy. Social services got involved after Lila called the police to report Eli's situation. She was terrified she would lose him, that he'd be sent to some foster home where no one would hold him the way she did at that bus stop. But the caseworker, seeing the bond between them, allowed Lila to remain part of Eli's transition. She found herself showing up at every meeting, every hearing, every required visit. Despite her poverty, despite her own brokenness, she fought for him with a strength she didn't know she had. And in fighting for Eli, she found herself fighting for something else, too, her own worth. One cold morning, after weeks of uncertainty, the judge looked directly at her and asked, "Miss Lila, would you be willing to foster this child until a permanent arrangement is made?" Her heart pounded. She had no steady job, no home to call her own. Yet she met Eli's hopeful eyes and knew the answer before she even opened her mouth. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll take him." Months passed. Lila found work at the diner where she had first taken Eli that night. The manager, having watched her selflessly feed the boy, offered her a chance when no one else would. From there, little by little, she saved. A small studio apartment became their home. Second-hand coats replaced the torn ones. They shared laughter, bedtime stories, and the kind of warmth money could never buy. But the most unforgettable moment came on a spring morning, when Eli woke her with a crayon drawing clutched in his tiny hand. It was a picture of the two of them, stick figures holding hands under a smiling sun. Above it, in shaky letters, were 3 words that made her eyes flood with tears. "My real mom." At the bus stop that night, Lila had been nothing but a shivering girl with empty hands. She thought she had nothing left to give. But life had given her Eli, and through his small, trembling whisper, she discovered the truth. Sometimes the greatest gifts are born in our lowest moments. Sometimes, when we think we have nothing, love asks us to give everything. And in giving, we find we were never empty at all. Sparkle's heartwarming message. This story reminds us that even in our darkest hours, compassion can change everything. A whisper from a child, a small act of love, can transform despair into hope and strangers into family. No one is ever truly lost when kindness is given and received.